You have no idea what that tattoo means." The young guard's finger jabbed toward the faded trident on her wrist, his voice dripping with contempt. Maggie Hayes stood frozen at the naval base gate, her pale blonde hair catching the Virginia morning light. She'd survived 300 bomb disposals in combat zones. She'd held her dying husband in the Afghan dust. But this 22-year-old sailor pointing at her matching tattoo, the sacred symbol she'd earned in blood, was calling her a fraud. Before we reveal what happened next, hit that subscribe button and stay until the end of this story. Comment below with your city so I can see how far Maggie's story travels. You won't believe what happens when the truth comes out. Margaret Hayes had driven 4 hours to reach Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek. 4 hours of Virginia highways of coffee that had gone cold in the cup holder of memories she'd tried to keep at bay. The March morning was cool fog rolling in from the Atlantic the way it always did this time of year, thick enough to taste the salt. She'd made this drive every year for 13 years, always on the same date, always alone. Her truck pulled up to the main security checkpoint at 0647. She'd timed it deliberately early enough to avoid the morning rush of personnel flooding onto base late enough that the sun was starting to burn through the coastal haze. The checkpoint was a simple affair: 2 young sailors in working uniforms, a striped gate arm, and a small guard shack with windows that reflected the pale morning light. Margaret rolled down her window and reached for her wallet. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. That was what 26 years in the Navy had given her, if nothing else. Steady hands when everything around her was falling apart. "Good morning," she said. The sailor who approached couldn't have been more than 22. His name tape read Brooks in crisp black letters. He had the kind of face that hadn't seen much of the world yet, smooth and confident in a way that came from never having been truly tested. His uniform was immaculate creases, sharp enough to cut paper. "Morning, ma'am. ID, please." Margaret handed him her Department of Defense retiree identification card. It was blue and white, slightly worn at the edges from years in her wallet. Brooks took it, glanced at it, then back at her face. His expression shifted just slightly. Not quite a smirk, but something in that neighborhood. "Purpose of your visit?" "I'm here to visit the Naval Special Warfare Memorial." Brooks turned the card over in his hands. His partner, a slightly older sailor named Chen, no relation to the senior chief, who would appear later, wandered over, curious. They exchanged a look, the kind of look that made Margaret's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "This is a retiree-dependent ID," Brooks said. "It's a retiree credential," Margaret corrected, her voice even. "I served 26 years. Brooks's eyebrows went up. He looked her over more carefully now, taking in her small frame. Her pale blonde hair pulled back in a loose tie, the faded denim jacket that had seen better days. She was 55 years old, though she might have passed for older in the harsh morning light. Life had worn grooves into her face that had nothing to do with age. 26 years, Brooks repeated, and there was something in his tone now, something that made Chen grin. "Doing what exactly?" "Explosive ordnance disposal." The words landed flat in the cool air. Brooks blinked. Then he laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, not yet, but it was dismissive. The laugh of someone who thought they'd just been told an obvious lie. "EOD, he said. "Right, and I'm a fighter pilot." Chen laughed too louder. "Ma'am, look, we get a lot of people coming through here with stories. Military spouses, family members, people who you know like to exaggerate their connection to—" "I'm not exaggerating anything," Margaret said. Her voice hadn't changed. It was still level, still calm, but there was something underneath it now, something bedrock solid that neither of the young sailors recognized. "I need you to scan the credential." Brooks sighed a dramatic sound. He walked back toward the guard shack, the card still in his hand, but he wasn't moving with any urgency. He was talking to Chen over his shoulder, saying something Margaret couldn't quite hear, and both of them were grinning. That was when Brooks noticed the tattoo. Margaret's jacket sleeve had ridden up when she'd handed over the ID, exposing her left wrist. The tattoo was small, no more than 2 inches across, but it was unmistakable. A Navy SEAL trident. The eagle's wings spread wide, the anchor and flintlock pistol clutched in its talons. the whole thing rendered in dark ink that had faded slightly with time and sun. Brooks stopped mid-stride. He turned around slowly, walked back to Margaret's window and bent down to get a closer look. His expression had changed completely. The dismissive amusement was gone, replaced by something harder. Offense, maybe. Indignation. "Nice tattoo," he said, and there was nothing nice in his voice. Margaret didn't respond. She kept her eyes forward, focused on the gate arm that should have been rising by now. Brooks leaned in closer. "You know what that is. I know what it is. Do you?" He pointed at it now, his finger inches from her skin. "That's a SEAL trident. That's earned, ma'am. People die earning that. You don't just get to ink it on yourself because you think it looks cool or because your boyfriend was on a team." Margaret's fingers tightened on the steering wheel, just slightly, just enough that her knuckles went white. "I need you to scan my credential," she said again. "I need you to explain that tattoo," Brooks shot back. "Because I'm looking at a middle-aged woman in a beat-up jacket claiming she was EOD wearing a trident she has no business wearing, and I'm starting to think we have a problem here." Chen had joined them now, circling around to the passenger side of the truck to get a better view. He was chewing gum, popping it loudly, his arms crossed over his chest. "Let me guess," Chen said. "Your son's a SEAL." "No." "Husband." Margaret's jaw clenched. "Scan the card." "Was he a SEAL?" Chen pressed. "Is that it? You got a tribute tattoo? That's sweet and all, but, ma'am, you gotta understand that insignia means something to us. To the community. It's not a fashion statement." Brooks laughed again, more openly now. "I bet she got it at Virginia Beach during Fleet Week. Probably thought it would get her free drinks." Other personnel were starting to notice the holdup. A couple of sailors heading toward the barracks slowed their pace, watching the scene unfold. A staff sergeant from the Marine Detachment paused on his morning run, jogging in place, curious. The audience was building. Margaret took a slow breath through her nose. She could feel the familiar weight settling over her, the old training kicking in. Stay calm. Assess the situation. Don't escalate. These were kids. They didn't know. They couldn't know. "Petty Officer Brooks," she said, reading his name tape clearly now. "I am asking you one more time to scan my credential through your system. It will verify everything I've told you." Brooks straightened up the card still in his hand. "You know what, sure, let's do that. Let's see what the system says about your impressive EOD career." He walked to the guard shack with exaggerated slowness, playing to the small crowd that had gathered. Chen stayed by the truck, his grin widening. "You seem awfully calm for someone who's about to get busted," Chen said. Margaret didn't answer. She was watching Brooks through the guard shack window, watching him swipe her card through the reader. She saw his face, saw the moment the screen flashed red, saw his expression shift into something triumphant. He came back out holding the card between two fingers like it was contaminated. "Access denied," he announced loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "Credential expired. Invalid for base access." Margaret closed her eyes for just a second. Of course. Of course they hadn't updated the system. She'd been told 3 years ago that there was a backlog that retiree credentials for personnel with certain classifications took time to process through the new database. She'd been told to be patient. She opened her eyes. "There's an error in your system. My classification level requires—" "Ma'am, I don't care what you think your classification level is," Brooks interrupted. "What I care about is that you just tried to gain unauthorized access to a secure military installation using fraudulent credentials. That's a federal crime." The words hit like a physical blow. Fraudulent. The crowd murmured. A female lieutenant who'd been walking toward the headquarters building stopped watching with open curiosity. A chief petty officer pulled out his phone, not even trying to be subtle about filming. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle," Brooks continued. His hand moved to his hip to his radio. "I'm calling the Master-at-Arms. You're going to be detained pending an investigation into—" "You're going to do what?" The voice came from behind them, sharp and clear enough to cut through the morning air. Everyone turned. Senior Chief Marcus Chen. The real Chen, not the gate guard, was standing about 15 feet away. He'd been on his morning walk, a routine he'd maintained for 20 years, even after retirement from active duty. He still lived in base housing as a civilian contractor, still couldn't shake the habit of being up before dawn. He was 48 years old, built like a fire plug, his face weathered to the color of teak from too many deployments in too many deserts. He'd been watching the confrontation from a distance, only half paying attention at first. Gate disputes were common, but something had caught his eye. The woman's posture. The way she sat in the truck, not relaxed, but at ease, a specific kind of ease that came from training. And then he'd seen her reach for her ID, seen the movement of her hand, economical and precise. And then he'd seen the tattoo. Marcus Chen had been a SEAL for 23 years. He knew that trident. More importantly, he knew that specific trident. He'd seen it before in another place, in another life. Petty Officer Brooks turned to face him, confused. "Senior Chief, sir, this woman is attempting to..." "Shut your mouth right now." Brooks blinked. "Sir, I said shut it." Chen walked forward, his eyes never leaving Margaret's face. He was looking at her the way you'd look at a ghost, something that shouldn't exist but impossibly does. "Petty Officer, give me that credential, now." Brooks hesitated, then handed it over. Chen took it, looked at the name, and felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. Margaret A. Hayes. His mind raced backward 13 years in an instant. Afghanistan, 2011. He'd been a first-class petty officer, then attached to SEAL Team 4, running direct action missions in Helmand Province. They'd had an EOD tech attached to their platoon, a rare thing back then. Even rarer, she'd been a woman. They'd called her Ice. Ice because nothing rattled her. Not the IEDs that could turn a man into pink mist in a microsecond. Not the firefights that erupted without warning in the narrow streets of Marja. Not the 100 daily reminders that she was the only woman in a platoon of Type A alpha males who didn't quite know what to make of her. She'd been small, blonde, quiet. She'd cleared more bombs in 6 months than most EOD techs saw in an entire career. And she'd been married to their platoon leader, Lieutenant Commander James Hayes, call sign Reaper. Chen looked from the ID back to Margaret's face. 13 years older, thinner. Lines carved deep around her eyes and mouth. But it was her. He'd bet his life on it. "Master Chief," he said quietly. Margaret's eyes met his for the first time. She didn't recognize him, he could tell. There'd been so many faces, so many deployments. But she recognized the tone. Respect, real and unfeigned. "Senior Chief," she replied, a question in her voice. "Marcus Chen, Team 4, Marja 2011. Something flickered across her face. Memory, maybe. Pain, definitely. "I remember." Brooks was looking between them, lost. "Senior Chief, this woman." Chen wheeled on him. "This woman is Master Chief Petty Officer Margaret Hayes, United States Navy, retired. And if you value your career even a little bit, you need to stop talking right now." The crowd had grown larger. At least 20 people now forming a loose semicircle around the gate. Word was spreading through the morning shift change like wildfire. Something's happening at the east gate. Some kind of confrontation. Brooks's face had gone red. "Sir, the system says..." "I don't care what the system says." Chen's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "I know who this is. I served with her. And you just accused a Navy Cross recipient of using fraudulent credentials." The air seemed to leave the immediate area. Navy Cross. The words hung there, impossible to ignore. The Navy Cross was second only to the Medal of Honor. It was earned, not given. It was for actions so far beyond the call of duty that most people couldn't even imagine them. Brooks' face went from red to white. Chen wasn't done. He stepped closer to the young petty officer, close enough that Brooks had to look up to meet his eyes. "You see that tattoo you were so concerned about? That trident?" Chen's voice was quiet now, but it carried. Everyone was silent, straining to hear. That belonged to her husband, Lieutenant Commander James Hayes. He was killed in action in March 2011. "Do you know how he died, Petty Officer?" Brooks couldn't speak. He shook his head. IED. Complex attack. Triple-stacked pressure plates daisy-chained to secondary devices. The kind of setup that takes hours to plan and execute. The kind designed to kill not just the first vehicle, but the entire response team. Chen paused. Master Chief Hayes was in the convoy. She was riding in the vehicle behind her husband's. She watched him die. Margaret's hands were shaking now, just slightly. She gripped the steering wheel harder. The blast pinned down the entire platoon, Chen continued. We were taking fire from 3 directions. We couldn't get to the casualties, couldn't get to Reaper, and Master Chief Hayes, under fire, crawled forward with her toolkit and started clearing the secondaries. 2 more devices. Either one would have killed everyone in the kill zone. He looked at Margaret now, his voice softening. She cleared them both, in the dirt, in the smoke, with her husband's blood on her hands. And when the Casvac bird finally landed, she rode back to base in the same helicopter as his body. The silence was total now. No one moved. No one breathed. Chen turned back to Brooks. So when you see that trident on her wrist, petty officer, understand that she earned the right to wear it in ways you cannot possibly comprehend. That's not a tribute tattoo. That's a memorial. That's a promise. That's every single thing you think the teams stand for made flesh. Brooks looked like he might be sick. His partner had stopped chewing his gum. The small crowd was motionless, processing. I need to call someone, Chen said, pulling out his cell phone. Someone needs to handle this properly. Margaret finally spoke. Her voice was rough. Senior Chief, that's not necessary. I just need... With respect. Master Chief, yes, it is necessary. Chen was already dialing. You deserve better than this, and these sailors need to learn something today. He stepped away, phone to his ear. Margaret sat in her truck, surrounded by staring faces, and waited. The fog was burning off now, revealing the bright Virginia sky. It was going to be a beautiful day. She looked at her wrist, at the small, faded trident that had caused so much trouble this morning. She'd gotten it exactly 1 year after James died. She'd needed that year. Needed to earn the right to match his in her own mind, at least. Needed to prove to herself that she could keep going, keep serving, keep living in a world that he no longer occupied. James had gotten his trident tattooed the day after he'd graduated buds young and proud and impossibly alive. Hers was identical. Same artist, same placement, mirror image. His on the right wrist, hers on the left. So that when they held hands, the tridents touched. They would never hold hands again. But the tridents would always be together. Brooks approached the truck slowly, like approaching a dangerous animal. His face was ashen. Ma'am, Master Chief, He couldn't find the words. There's nothing I can say. Margaret looked at him. Really looked at him. He was so young. They were all so young now. Young enough to be her children. Young enough that Afghanistan was ancient history to them, a war their older siblings might have fought in. You didn't know, she said simply. That's not an excuse. No, Margaret agreed. It's not. But it's a reason. You made assumptions. You saw what you expected to see instead of what was actually in front of you. We all do it. You just got caught. I accused you of... Brooks's voice cracked. Of committing a crime. I touched you without permission. I mocked your husband's sacrifice. Yes, Margaret said. You did all of those things. The honesty of it seemed to break something in the young sailor. His shoulders sagged. I'll accept whatever punishment they give me. I deserve it. Margaret didn't argue with that. She looked past him to where Chen was still on the phone, speaking urgently to whoever was on the other end. She could see him gesturing, his body language intense. A vehicle was approaching now, a black SUV with government plates moving fast. It pulled up to the gate and stopped. The driver's side door opened and a woman stepped out. Commander Sarah Vance was 42 years old, the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Group 2, and she was moving with the kind of controlled urgency that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. She was in her khaki uniform, ribbons stacked impressively on her chest, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. She'd been in a meeting when Chen's call came through. She'd left immediately. Chen met her halfway, speaking rapidly. Margaret couldn't hear the words, but she saw Vance's expression change, saw her head turn toward the truck, saw her eyes find Margaret's face through the windshield. Vance walked to the truck. She didn't hurry, but she didn't waste time either. When she reached the driver's side window, she came to attention and brought her hand up in a salute so sharp and precise it could have been used to measure angles. "Master Chief Hayes," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent checkpoint. "On behalf of Naval Special Warfare Group 2, welcome back to Little Creek. It is an honor to have you here." The crowd erupted in whispers. "Master Chief," the words rippled through them. A woman, a Master Chief, in EOD, with the SEALs. Margaret returned the salute with a small nod, military courtesy between peers. "Commander," she said, "I was just hoping to visit the memorial." Vance held the salute for another beat before dropping her hand. Then she turned slowly and deliberately to face the checkpoint personnel. Her expression could have frozen the Atlantic. "Who," she said, her voice cutting through the morning air like a blade, "is responsible for this delay?" Brooks stepped forward on shaking legs. "Ma'am, I am. Petty Officer Brooks." Vance looked at him the way an entomologist might look at a particularly disappointing insect specimen. "Petty Officer Brooks, do you have any idea who you've been detaining?" "I do now, ma'am." "I don't think you do." And Vance took a step closer to him. The crowd pressed in, everyone wanting to hear. Master Chief Explosive Ordnance Disposal Technician Margaret Hayes served 26 years in the United States Navy. She deployed 8 times to active combat zones. She is credited with over 300 IED disposals in theater. 300. Each one a life-or-death decision made under impossible pressure. She paused, letting that sink in. For 3 of those deployments, she was directly attached to SEAL Team 4. My team, Petty Officer. She went where we went. She walked point-clearing paths through some of the most IED-dense terrain in Afghanistan. She saved more SEAL lives than anyone in this command can count. Vance pointed to Margaret's wrist to the tattoo that had started all of this. "You see that trident? That's for her husband, Lieutenant Commander James Hayes, killed in action March 2011, leading his men in Helmand Province." "And do you want to know how much Master Chief Hayes understands what that trident means?" Brooks was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face. He didn't try to hide them. The IED that killed her husband was part of a complex daisy chain system. Vance continued, her voice dropping, but losing none of its intensity. While his team was pinned down by enemy fire while they were trying to retrieve his body, Master Chief Hayes crawled 50 meters under fire to reach the secondary devices. She rendered them safe. Both of them. She performed that task 10 feet from her husband's body. The crowd was dead silent. Someone in the back was filming on their phone. This would be all over social media within the hour. She earned the right to wear that insignia with her own blood, her own courage, and a level of sacrifice that you, Petty Officer Brooks, cannot possibly comprehend. Vance's voice was steel. "And you accused her of wearing it fraudulently." Brooks opened his mouth, closed it. No words would come. Vance turned to Chen. "Senior Chief, take Petty Officer Brooks and his partner to my office. They are relieved of duty effective immediately. I'll deal with them after I've escorted Master Chief Hayes to the memorial." "Yes, ma'am," Chen said. He gestured to Brooks and his partner. "Let's go." The 2 young sailors walked away like men heading to the gallows. The crowd began to disperse slowly, reluctantly, everyone talking in hushed tones. The show was over. Vance turned back to Margaret. Her expression softened just slightly. "Master Chief, I am profoundly sorry for what you experienced here this morning. It is an unacceptable failure of our standards and our professionalism." Margaret had been staring straight ahead, but now she looked at Vance. "Commander, with respect, your men were doing their job. They saw someone who didn't fit their expectation and they challenged it. The system failure isn't theirs, it's in the database that didn't update my credentials properly. That's generous of you." "It's accurate." Margaret's voice was firm. "But they do need to learn that the uniform comes in more shapes and sizes than they've been taught to expect. That heroes don't always look like the recruiting posters." Vance studied her for a long moment. "You know I'm going to have to discipline them." "I know. That's your prerogative as their commander." Margaret paused. "But if you're asking my opinion, Commander, I'd say they need education more than punishment. They need to understand what they did wrong and why it matters. Not just for me, but for every service member who doesn't fit their narrow definition of what a warrior looks like. Vance nodded slowly. I'll take that under advisement. Would you be willing to participate in that education? Speak to the command. Margaret hesitated. She'd come here for one reason and one reason only. To stand at the memorial wall, to touch James's name, carved in the granite, to spend a few quiet moments with him, the way she did every year. She hadn't come for attention. She'd never wanted attention. But she thought about the young female sailors she'd seen in the crowd watching. She thought about the next woman who would show up at this gate with credentials that didn't quite match the guards' expectations. She thought about James, who had always believed that the team should represent the best of America, all of America. Yes, she said. I'll speak to them. Thank you. Vance stepped back from the truck. For now, let me escort you to the memorial. You've waited long enough. The gate arm rose. Margaret put the truck in gear and drove onto the base Vance's SUV, following behind. As they passed through, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the checkpoint, saw the small knot of sailors still standing there, still processing what they'd witnessed. She wondered if Brooks would recover from this. She hoped he would. He was young. Young people made mistakes. The question was whether they learned from them. The memorial was at the far end of the base, overlooking the water. It was a simple thing, really. A curved wall of black granite names etched into the stone, each one representing a naval special warfare operator who had made the ultimate sacrifice. The wall was arranged chronologically, starting with Vietnam and working forward through decades of conflict. Margaret parked in the small lot. Vance pulled in beside her, but didn't get out right away, giving Margaret space. Margaret sat in her truck for a moment, hands on the wheel, looking at the memorial through the windshield. 13 years. 13 times she'd made this drive. 13 times she'd stood before that wall. And it never got easier. She opened the door and stepped out. The morning sun was fully up now, burning away the last of the fog. The temperature was rising. It was going to be warm today, the kind of early spring warmth that promised summer wasn't far away. She walked to the wall, found the section for 2011, found March, found his name. Lieutenant Commander James R. Hayes, March 18th, 2011. Operation Enduring Freedom. Her fingers traced the letters carved into the stone. The granite was cool under her hand, smooth and permanent. This was all that was left in the official record. A name, a rank, a date. 3 lines to sum up a life. It wasn't nearly enough. Behind her, she heard footsteps, multiple sets. She turned and saw Senior Chief Chen approaching along with several other men. Older men her age or close to it, some in uniform and some in civilian clothes. They moved with the particular gait of men who'd spent time in the teams, that careful economy of motion. Chen stopped a respectful distance away. Master Chief, some of the guys from Team 4 heard you were here. We wanted to pay our respects, if that's okay. Margaret looked at them. She recognized a few faces, though they were all older now, grayer. Time had marked them the way it had marked her. Of course, she said. They formed a loose line, each man taking a moment at the wall, touching James's name. Some spoke quietly words meant only for the dead. Some were silent. All of them, when they finished, came to Margaret and shook her hand or embraced her, depending on how well they'd known her. He saved my life in Kandahar, one of them said. I never got to thank him. I was there that day. Another said, his voice rough. What you did, Master Chief. We've never forgotten. None of us have. One by one, they paid their respects, and then one by one, they drifted away, leaving her alone again with the wall and the names and the memories. She stood there for a long time until the sun was high and warm on her shoulders, until the morning crowds had come and gone, until she felt the familiar knot in her chest loosen just a little. I kept my promise, she said quietly to the name on the wall. They're still out there, James, still serving, still protecting, still worthy of the trident. Some of them are even women now, officially. Can you believe that? The wall didn't answer. It never did. But standing there with the sun and the sound of the water and the weight of the years, Margaret felt something close to peace. She would come back next year. She would come back every year until she couldn't anymore. This was her ritual, her way of keeping him close. The tattoo on her wrist was for her a reminder that she carried him with her always. But this annual pilgrimage was for him a promise that he would never be forgotten. She touched the wall one last time, then turned and walked back to her truck. Commander Vance was waiting by her SUV, speaking quietly into her phone. When she saw Margaret approaching, she ended the call. Master Chief, before you go, I wanted to ask again about speaking to the command. We're doing a training evolution next month on professional standards and cultural competency. Your perspective would be invaluable. Margaret considered. It would mean coming back, confronting more questions, more attention. It would mean sharing parts of her story that she usually kept private. But it would also mean that maybe the next woman like her wouldn't face what she'd faced this morning. Maybe the next Brooks would see past his assumptions. Maybe that was worth the discomfort. Send me the details, Margaret said. I'll be there. Vance smiled a real smile. Thank you. The Navy is better for having had you in it, Master Chief. And it's better for still having your voice. Margaret drove off base a few minutes later. The gate guards who checked her out were different from the morning shift, and they snapped to attention when they saw her credentials waving her through with crisp professionalism. As she turned onto the highway heading home, Margaret glanced at her wrist. The trident caught the sunlight faded, but eternal, a mark of love and loss and service that would stay with her until her own name was added to some wall somewhere. She'd gotten it exactly right, she thought. The placement, the design, the meaning. James would have approved. He would have approved of this morning too, she thought. Not the conflict, but the resolution, the teaching moment. He'd always believed in second chances and the power of education over punishment. He'd always seen the potential in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves. You would have liked Commander Vance, Margaret said aloud to the empty truck. She gets it. She really gets it. The road stretched ahead 4 hours of Virginia countryside between her and home. But for the first time in 13 years, the drive didn't feel quite so heavy. Something had shifted this morning. Something important. She'd been seen. Really seen. Not as a widow, not as a symbol, but as what she actually was, a warrior who had earned her place in the fight. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The call came 3 days later while Margaret was in her garden pulling weeds that had started to take over the flower beds. Her phone buzzed in her back pocket, an unfamiliar Virginia number lighting up the screen. This is Margaret. Master Chief Hayes, this is Commander Vance. Do you have a few minutes? Margaret straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. Of course, Commander. I wanted to update you on the situation with Petty Officers Brooks and Miller. They've been formally counseled and placed on administrative duties pending completion of remedial training. But there's something else. Vance paused. Brooks has asked to speak with you directly. He's written a letter and he wants permission to deliver it in person. Margaret was quiet for a moment, processing. What did you tell him? That it was entirely your decision. I made it clear that you are under no obligation to provide him with closure or forgiveness. That's not your job. But you think I should see him? I think, Vance said carefully, that it might be valuable for both of you, but only if you're comfortable with it. Margaret looked at the garden, at the chaos of weeds and neglected soil. She'd been meaning to get to this for weeks. Avoidance dressed up as busy work. He's available whenever you are. I can arrange for you to meet here on base in a controlled environment. Or if you prefer, we can do it by video call. In person, Margaret said. Next Tuesday. Morning, if possible. I'll make it happen. Thank you, Master Chief. After they hung up, Margaret stood in her garden for a long time, phone still in her hand. She wasn't sure why she'd agreed. Maybe because she remembered being young and stupid, once remembered making mistakes that felt catastrophic at the time. Maybe because James would have done the same thing. Or maybe because some small part of her wanted Brooks to understand what he'd actually done, wanted to look him in the eye and see if there was anything worth salvaging there. Tuesday morning arrived cold and gray. Margaret made the drive back to Little Creek, this time with an official appointment and a visitor's pass that had been couriered to her house. The gate guards waved her through with crisp salutes. No drama this time. No accusations. Commander Vance met her at the headquarters building, a sprawling complex that housed the administrative heart of Nessalvdalers Group 2. They shook hands in the lobby. "He's nervous," Vance said as they walked down a corridor lined with photographs of frogmen and seals spanning decades of warfare. "Hasn't slept much from what I'm told." "Good," Margaret said, and meant it. They entered a small conference room. Brooks was already there, standing at attention by the window, his uniform perfect, his face gaunt. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in less than a week. When he saw Margaret, something crumbled in his expression, but he held his position. "Petty Officer Brooks," Vance said, "Master Chief Hayes has graciously agreed to meet with you. You have 30 minutes. I'll be right outside." Vance left, closing the door behind her. The silence that followed was suffocating. "Sit down, Petty Officer," Margaret said finally. Brooks sat. His hands were shaking slightly. He had an envelope on the table in front of him, the paper crisp and white. "You wanted to talk," Margaret said, taking the seat across from him. "So talk." Brooks swallowed hard. "Master Chief, I wrote you a letter. I spent 3 days on it. But now that you're here, it seems inadequate. Everything seems inadequate. Read it anyway." He picked up the envelope with trembling fingers, opened it, and pulled out several sheets of paper covered in neat handwriting. He began to read. "Dear Master Chief Hayes, there is no apology sufficient for what I did. I know that. I'm not writing this seeking forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I'm writing because you deserve to know that I understand the magnitude of my failure." His voice cracked, but he pushed through. "I spent the last week reading everything I could find about you, about EOD, about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, about the women who served in combat roles long before it was officially recognized. I read about Operation Enduring Freedom. I read about IEDs and the technicians who faced them. I read about your husband." Margaret's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. "I learned that you were one of the first female EOD techs to deploy with SEAL teams. That you had to fight for that privilege, had to prove yourself over and over again to men who didn't think you belonged. That you saved lives on missions that are still classified. That you received the Navy Cross for actions I'm not cleared to know the details of, but that involved rendering safe a device while under direct enemy fire in a building that was actively collapsing." Brooks's hands were shaking harder now, making the paper rattle. "I learned that after your husband died, you requested immediate redeployment, that you went back to Afghanistan 6 weeks after his funeral, that you served 3 more tours, that you kept doing the job, even though every single device you faced must have reminded you of the one that killed him. I learned that you trained the next generation of EOD techs, that several of them credit you with saving their lives by teaching them techniques you developed in the field." He stopped, looked up at her. His eyes were red. "And I learned that I treated you like garbage based on nothing but my own ignorance and prejudice. I saw a middle-aged woman and decided you couldn't possibly be who you said you were. I saw your tattoo, and instead of asking respectfully about it, I mocked it. I touched you without permission. I accused you of a crime. I humiliated you in front of dozens of people." "Yes," Margaret said flatly. "You did." Brooks set the letter down. "Master Chief, I don't know how to carry this. I don't know how to be the person who did that to you and still look at myself in the mirror." "Then don't." He blinked. "What? Don't be that person anymore." Margaret leaned forward. "You can't undo what you did. You can't take back those words or that moment. But you can decide what kind of sailor you become after this. You can decide whether this is the story of how your career ended or the story of how you finally learned what service actually means." Brooks stared at her. "You're not angry." "Oh, I'm angry," Margaret corrected. "I'm furious. But I've been in this Navy long enough to know that anger without purpose is just noise. So here's what you're going to do, Petty Officer. You're going to finish your remedial training. You're going to go back to work. And every single day, every time you check someone's ID or question someone's credentials, you're going to remember this moment. You're going to see the person, not your assumptions about them." "Yes, Master Chief." "And one more thing," Margaret's voice hardened. The next time you see a woman in uniform, you're going to treat her with the exact same respect you'd give to a male admiral, because she earned her place there just like you earned yours. Maybe more so because she probably had to fight twice as hard for it. Brooks nodded, tears streaming down his face now. I will. I promise I will. Margaret stood. Your letter was adequate, petty officer. Not sufficient, but adequate. Keep working on being better. She walked to the door, then paused and looked back. And Brooks, don't waste this. Don't let shame paralyze you. Let it motivate you. That's the only way any of this means anything. She left him there, still sitting at the table, still crying. Vance was waiting in the hallway. How did it go? The commander asked. He'll either be a better sailor or he'll wash out. Either way, he knows what he did wrong. That's all we can ask for. Vance fell into step beside her. I have something else to show you if you have time. They walked through the building deeper into the complex until they reached a large auditorium. Vance opened the door and gestured for Margaret to enter. The room was full. Easily 200 sailors, maybe more, all seated in rows facing a stage. They were mixed ranks, mixed rates, men and women both. At the front stood a large projection screen showing the Nia Salvage Group 2 insignia. What is this? Margaret asked. Your audience, Vance said. I moved up the training timeline. After what happened last week, I decided we couldn't wait. The command needs to hear this now. Margaret felt her stomach drop. Commander, I thought this was next month. I haven't prepared anything. You don't need to prepare. Just tell them your story. Tell them what service means. Tell them what they didn't see when they looked at you. Before Margaret could protest further, Vance was walking toward the stage, gesturing for her to follow. The sailors noticed them entering, a ripple of attention moving through the crowd. Margaret saw Brooks sitting in the back row, his face still blotchy from crying. She saw Miller beside him, looking equally miserable. She saw young faces and old faces, curious faces and skeptical faces. Vance took the microphone. Good morning. I'm Commander Vance, and we're here today for a critical training session on professional conduct, respect, and the true meaning of service. But before we begin the official curriculum, I want to introduce someone who embodies these principles. Master Chief Petty Officer Margaret Hayes, United States Navy, retired. Polite applause rippled through the room. Margaret walked to the center of the stage, accepted the microphone from Vance, and looked out at the sea of faces. I'm going to tell you a story, she began. And some of you aren't going to like it. Some of you are going to feel uncomfortable. That's good. That means you're paying attention. She told them about arriving at the gate, about Brooks and Miller and their assumptions, about the mockery and the accusation. She didn't spare them any details, didn't soften the impact. She let them sit with the discomfort of recognizing themselves in those young sailors' mistakes. I'm 55 years old, she said. I'm 5'4". I have pale blonde hair and I was wearing a denim jacket that's older than some of you. When those two sailors looked at me, they saw what they expected to see. A middle-aged woman, probably someone's wife. Definitely not a warrior. Definitely not someone who'd earned the right to wear a seal trident even as a memorial to her husband. She paused, let the silence build. The problem isn't that they challenged me. The problem is how they challenged me. The problem is that they looked at me and decided before checking their system, before asking questions, before showing basic respect that I couldn't possibly be who I said I was. Because I didn't look the part. A female petty officer in the third row was nodding. Margaret focused on her. How many of you have made assumptions about someone based on their appearance? Margaret asked. Come on, be honest. Raise your hands. Slowly, reluctantly, hands began to go up. 1, then 5, then dozens. Eventually, nearly every hand in the room was raised. That's human nature, Margaret said. We're pattern-matching machines. We see things and we categorize them based on our experience. But here's the thing, military service isn't supposed to be about what you look like. It's about what you do. It's about the oath you take and the standards you uphold. She walked to the edge of the stage. I deployed 8 times to combat zones. I disarmed over 300 IEDs. I trained hundreds of EOD techs. I served attached to SEAL teams for 3 tours. And I did all of that while being underestimated, questioned, and doubted at every step. Not because I wasn't qualified, not because I couldn't do the job, but because I didn't look like what people thought a warrior should look like. The room was silent now, every eye on her. My husband was Lieutenant Commander James Hayes. He was killed by an IED in Afghanistan in 2011. I was in the convoy behind his. I watched the explosion. I heard the radio chatter. I knew he was gone before we even stopped moving. Margaret's voice didn't waver, but her hand moved unconsciously to her wrist to the tattoo hidden under her sleeve. The blast pinned down his entire team. They were taking fire from 3 directions. They couldn't reach the casualties. They couldn't secure the area because there were secondary devices all over the kill zone. And I crawled forward with my toolkit and I cleared those devices, both of them, while they shot at me, while my husband's blood soaked into the sand 10 feet away. Someone in the audience made a small sound, quickly stifled. I didn't do it because I'm special. I didn't do it because I'm brave. I did it because it was my job, because those SEALs needed a path cleared and I was the EOD tech on scene. That's what service means. You do the job in front of you, regardless of the cost. She held up her wrist, pulled back the sleeve to show the trident tattoo. I got this tattoo 1 year after James died. Same design as his. Same placement mirror image. So that if we ever held hands again, somehow, somewhere, the tridents would touch. I earned the right to wear this through 26 years of service and through the worst moment of my life. And last week, a 22-year-old sailor told me I had no right to wear it, that I was disgracing it, that I probably got it at the beach during Fleet Week. Brooks in the back row put his head in his hands. That sailor made a mistake, Margaret continued. A big one. But you know what? He's not a bad person. He's a young person who learned the wrong lessons about what makes someone valuable in the military. He learned that warriors look a certain way, sound a certain way, carry themselves a certain way. And when he met someone who didn't fit that mold, he rejected the evidence in front of him. She turned, looked directly at Brooks. Stand up, Petty Officer Brooks. Brooks stood slowly, his face ashen. Come down here. The walk from the back of the auditorium to the stage seemed to take forever. Brooks kept his eyes down, his shoulders hunched. When he reached the stage, he stood at attention, rigid with fear. Margaret faced him. Tell them what you learned. Brooks's voice was barely audible. I learned that I don't know anything. Louder. I learned that I don't know anything. His voice cracked. I learned that assumptions are poison. I learned that respect isn't something you give only to people who look like they deserve it. I learned that heroes come in every shape and size and gender and age, and if you can't see that you're not just blind, you're dangerous. Margaret nodded. And what are you going to do differently? I'm going to ask before I assume. I'm going to verify before I accuse. I'm going to treat every sailor with the respect they've earned by putting on the uniform regardless of what I think I see. He was crying again, but he didn't look away. And I'm going to spend the rest of my career making up for what I did to you, Master Chief. Good. Margaret turned back to the audience. That's growth. That's what we need. Not perfection, but the willingness to admit mistakes and change behavior. She gestured for Brooks to return to his seat. He practically fled back to the safety of the back row. I want to be clear about something, Margaret said to the room. I didn't come here today to shame anyone. I came here because Commander Vance asked me to and because I believe in what we do here. I believe in the Navy. I believe in naval special warfare. I believe that we are capable of being better than our worst moments. A chief petty officer in the front row raised his hand. Margaret pointed at him. Master Chief, with respect, how do we fix this? How do we make sure the next generation doesn't make the same mistakes? You fix it by doing exactly what you're doing right now, Margaret said. You listen. You learn. You challenge your own assumptions. When you see someone who doesn't fit your mental image of what a sailor should be, you don't dismiss them. You get curious. You ask questions. You give them the same benefit of the doubt you'd want for yourself. A female second class in the middle of the room spoke up without raising her hand. Master Chief, I've been in for 6 years. I've been questioned at gates and gyms and chow halls. People assume I'm a dependent. They assume I'm lost. They assume I need help finding my husband's command. How do you keep your composure when it happens over and over? Margaret smiled a sad smile. You breathe. You remember why you're here. You remember that their ignorance is their problem, not yours. And you do your job so well that eventually even the skeptics have to admit you belong. But what if they never admit it? The sailor pressed. Then they never admit it, Margaret said. You're not serving for their approval. You're serving because you took an oath. Your worth isn't determined by whether or not some gate guard believes in you. The sailor nodded, but her expression was still troubled. Vance stood up from where she'd been sitting in the front row. Master Chief, can you talk about what happened after your husband died? How you kept serving? Margaret was quiet for a moment. This was the part she rarely discussed. The part that felt too raw, even after 13 years. After James died, they wanted to send me home. Standard procedure for family casualties. But I fought it. I requested to stay in theater. They eventually agreed, but they pulled me off the line for a few weeks. Put me in a support role at the FOB. She looked out at the faces watching her. I lasted 10 days before I couldn't take it anymore. I went to my commanding officer and I told him I needed to get back out there. He asked me if I was sure. I told him I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. Why? Someone asked from the back. Because sitting still meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant falling apart. Margaret's voice was steady, but her eyes were distant. Out there clearing routes, checking devices, doing the mission that kept me alive, that gave me purpose. The moment I stopped moving, I knew I'd collapse under the weight of it all. The auditorium was silent, so I went back out. Same routes James and I had cleared together. Same villages, same faces, and every single device I approached, every single time I knelt in the dirt with my tools, I thought about him. I thought about how he'd loved this work, how he'd believed in the mission, how he'd died doing exactly what he'd trained his whole life to do. She paused, swallowed hard. And I made a choice. I decided that if I was going to survive this, I had to make his death mean something. I had to be so good at my job, so dedicated to the mission, that his sacrifice wouldn't be wasted. Every IED I cleared was one less widow, one less mother getting that knock on the door, one less family destroyed the way mine was. A male lieutenant in the second row stood up. Master Chief, that's the most dedicated thing I've ever heard. But it also sounds like trauma. Did anyone help you process what you were going through? Margaret laughed a short, bitter sound. Process. In 2011, we barely talked about PTSD back then. The chaplain had a session with me. A psychiatrist cleared me for duty. That was it. The processing came later, years later, when I finally went to the VA and admitted I wasn't okay. Are you okay now? The lieutenant asked. Some days, Margaret said honestly. Some days I wake up and I'm fine. I go about my life. I work in my garden. I meet friends for coffee. And some days I wake up and I'm back in Afghanistan smelling cordite and dust, feeling the weight of that toolkit in my hands. Trauma doesn't heal cleanly. It just becomes something you learn to carry. The room absorbed that. These were warriors, people who understood that scars, physical and mental, were part of the job. A senior chief stood up. Master Chief, what would you say to the women in this room who are facing similar assumptions and disrespect? Margaret looked around, counting the female faces scattered throughout the crowd. There were more than she'd expected, maybe 30 or 40 out of 200. A far cry from her early days when she'd been the only woman in most rooms she entered. I'd say document everything. Keep records. Build a network of allies, male and female, who believe in you and will support you. And understand that you're going to have to work twice as hard for half the recognition, and that's not fair. But it's reality. She paused. But I'd also say this, you belong here. You took the same oath. You meet the same standards. You bleed the same blood. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. The women in the room sat straighter. One of them started clapping, and within seconds the entire auditorium had joined in. The applause was thunderous, genuine. When it died down, Vance took the microphone back. Master Chief Hayes has given us a lot to think about. I want to end this session by announcing some changes to our command policies. She pulled up a slide on the projection screen. It showed a new protocol for gate security. Effective immediately, all gate personnel will complete enhanced training on credential verification. They will scan IDs first, ask questions second. They will treat every person approaching this base with the same baseline respect, regardless of appearance. And they will be held accountable for failures in professionalism. Another slide appeared, this one showing a mentorship program. We're also launching a mentorship initiative pairing junior female service members with senior veterans like Master Chief Hayes. The goal is to provide guidance support and real-world perspective on navigating a career in naval special warfare and related communities. Vance looked at Margaret. Master Chief Hayes has agreed to be one of our founding mentors. I encourage anyone interested in participating to sign up at the door on your way out. The session ended with another round of applause. Sailors filed out slowly, many of them stopping to thank Margaret or ask follow-up questions. Brooks approached last after nearly everyone else had left. "Master Chief," he said quietly, "thank you for not giving up on me." Margaret studied him. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because the Navy needs good sailors, and you could still be one if you choose to be." "I choose to be," Brooks said firmly. "I swear it." "Then prove it. Not to me, to yourself." He nodded and left. Vance and Margaret were alone in the auditorium now, the echoes of 200 voices still seeming to linger in the air. "That was powerful," Vance said. "Thank you for being vulnerable with them. That's not easy." "No," Margaret agreed. "It's not. But if it helps even one of them avoid making the same mistakes, it's worth it." They walked out together into the bright Virginia afternoon. The base was alive with activity sailors moving purposefully between buildings, vehicles coming and going from the gates. "I have one more request," Vance said as they reached Margaret's truck. "We have a group of female SEAL candidates coming through next month. First integrated BUDS class. They could use a talk from someone who's been where they're going." Margaret opened her truck door, then stopped. "BUDS commander. I was never a SEAL. I don't know if I'm the right person." "You're exactly the right person," Vance interrupted. "These women are about to enter the most physically and mentally demanding training the military offers. They're going to face doubt from others and from themselves. They need to hear from someone who faced similar challenges and came out the other side." Margaret considered. She thought about the young women in the auditorium today, the ones who'd looked at her with something like hope in their eyes. She thought about what it would have meant to her decades ago to have someone like herself to look up to. "Send me the details," she said finally. "I'll be there." On the drive home, Margaret's phone rang repeatedly. News of the training session had spread. A journalist wanted an interview. A veterans organization wanted her to speak at their next conference. A documentary filmmaker wanted to tell her story. She ignored them all. She wasn't interested in fame or recognition. She'd done what she'd done because it was necessary, not because she wanted credit for it. But as she drove, she thought about the faces in that auditorium. The shame on Brooks's face. The hope on the female sailors' faces. The dawning understanding on everyone else's faces as they realized how narrow their view of service had been. Maybe Vance was right. Maybe this was how you changed things. Not through policy alone, but through stories. Through making the invisible visible. Through forcing people to confront their assumptions. It was exhausting, this work of education and enlightenment. Margaret would have much preferred to be left alone with her garden and her memories. But James wouldn't have left it alone. He would have done exactly what she'd done today. He would have turned his pain into purpose, his loss into a lesson. So she would too. For him. For the women coming after her. For the Navy they'd both loved, despite its flaws. She glanced at her wrist at the trident tattoo visible as she held the steering wheel. The ink was faded, but the meaning was eternal. "We're not done yet," she said quietly, speaking to James the way she always did when she was alone. "Still got work to do." The highway stretched ahead, carrying her home through the spring afternoon. Behind her at Little Creek, Brooks was sitting in his barracks room, rereading the notes he'd taken during Margaret's speech. Miller was calling his mother, telling her he'd screwed up but maybe learned something important. Commander Vance was drafting new training protocols that would eventually be adopted across the entire Nia Salvador community. And somewhere in the system, Margaret's credentials were finally being updated. Her record corrected, her service properly documented for the next time someone questioned who she was. The ripples were spreading. One confrontation at a gate, One painful conversation, one powerful speech at a time. It was slow work, changing hearts and minds. But Margaret had spent 26 years in the Navy. She knew how to be patient. She knew how to do the job in front of her one wire at a time. This was just another kind of bomb to defuse. And she'd always been good at her job. The phone call came at 2 in the morning, 3 weeks after the training session. Margaret was awake anyway, staring at the ceiling the way she did most nights when sleep wouldn't come. When she saw the Virginia area code, her first thought was that something had happened to someone at Little Creek. Maybe Brooks had done something stupid. Maybe Vance needed her again. "This is Margaret. Master Chief Hayes." The voice was male, older, rough with emotion. "My name is Rick Callahan. I was Lieutenant Commander Hayes's Master Chief, his first platoon chief back in 2009. Margaret sat up, turning on the lamp. "Master Chief Callahan, James talked about you, said you taught him everything that mattered. He was a hell of an officer. Best I ever served under." Callahan paused. "I'm calling because I saw the video, the one from your speech at Little Creek. It's going around on Facebook, YouTube, everywhere. And Master Chief, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you 13 years ago." Margaret's chest tightened. "What are you talking about?" "The IED that killed Reaper, the one you cleared the secondaries on." Callahan's breathing was labored, like he was fighting to get the words out. "We lied to you about that mission. Not about James dying, that was real, but about why we were there, about what we were really doing." The room tilted. Margaret gripped the phone harder. "Explain that." "Not over the phone. I'm in Richmond, about an hour from you. Can I come see you today? I know it's early, but I've been carrying this for 13 years, and after seeing you talk about that day, about what you did, I can't carry it anymore." "Come now," Margaret said. "I'll make coffee." She sat in her kitchen for the next hour, watching the clock, trying to keep her hands steady. What could he possibly mean they'd lied? She'd been there. She'd seen James's body. She'd cleared those devices. She'd lived with that day every moment since. What was left to lie about Callahan arrived just after 4. He was in his early 60s, thick around the middle, with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too much. Margaret opened the door before he could knock. "Master Chief." "Master Chief." He stepped inside, looking around her small house like he was memorizing exits. Old habits. "Thank you for seeing me." They sat at her kitchen table. Margaret poured coffee. Neither of them drank it. "Tell me," she said. Callahan's hands were shaking. "The mission that day. We were told it was a routine patrol checking on village elders in the district. That's what went in the official report. That's what we told you. But it wasn't routine. We were hunting a bomb maker, guy named Ahmadi. He'd been responsible for at least 40 coalition deaths, maybe more. We had intel that he was in that village meeting with Taliban leadership. The mission was a kill or capture op." Margaret felt ice forming in her veins. James knew this. James planned it. He volunteered for it. Callahan looked at her with eyes full of guilt. He knew it was dangerous. He knew Ahmadi had a reputation for booby-trapping everything for complex ambush scenarios. But the intel was solid, and we had approval from Task Force Command. "Why wasn't I briefed?" "Because you weren't supposed to be on that convoy." Callahan's voice cracked. "We had another EOD tech assigned, Staff Sergeant Collins. But he got hit with food poisoning the night before, knocked him completely out. We needed an EOD presence, and you were the only one available. James argued against bringing you, said it was too risky, said we should abort, but Command overruled him." Margaret stood up, paced to the window. "You're telling me James didn't want me on that mission? He fought for an hour. He said, and I quote, 'I will not take my wife into an ambush scenario.' But we were under pressure. Ahmadi was only going to be there for a narrow window. If we missed it, we'd lose him for months. So they ordered him to take me." "Yes." Margaret turned back to face him. "And then what happened?" Callahan's face was gray. "Everything went wrong from the start. Our intel said Ahmadi would be in a compound on the north side of the village. We approached from the south. James's vehicle was led. Yours was second. 2 more vehicles behind you." "I remember the formation." What you don't know is that James stopped his vehicle about 100 meters before the IED. He radioed back to the convoy that something felt wrong. The street was too empty, too quiet. He wanted to dismount and clear on foot. Margaret's hands clenched into fists. That's not in any report I've seen, because we deleted it from the radio logs. Callahan looked down at his coffee. Command ordered him to proceed. Said we were running out of time, that Ahmadi was about to leave the village. James argued. Said every instinct he had was screaming trap. They told him he was being overcautious. Told him to roll forward. And he did. He did. Because he was following orders. Because that's what we all do. Callahan's voice was barely a whisper now. He moved his vehicle forward exactly 34 meters, and then the world exploded. Margaret sat back down, her legs suddenly weak. You're telling me it was preventable. You're telling me he knew it was a trap and they made him drive into it anyway. I'm telling you that James Hayes died because someone in an operations center 200 miles away decided that catching one bomb maker was worth more than the life of one SEAL platoon commander. Callahan wiped his eyes. And I'm telling you that I was on the radio. I heard him argue. I heard the fear in his voice, and I didn't back him up. I didn't add my voice to his. I let them bully him into moving forward. The kitchen was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. After the blast, Callahan continued, when we were pinned down, when you crawled forward to clear the secondary's command, ordered us not to mention the previous radio traffic in our after-action reports. They said it would complicate the investigation. They said James would still be considered a hero, that his family would still get full benefits, but that dwelling on the circumstances would only cause unnecessary pain. Unnecessary pain, Margaret repeated, her voice hollow. I know how it sounds. I've lived with it for 13 years. Every day I wake up and I think about that convoy, about James arguing over the radio, about him finally saying Roger moving forward in this dead, resigned voice, like he knew exactly what was about to happen. Margaret stood again, walked to the sink, braced herself against it. Who gave the order? Who told him to move forward? Lieutenant Colonel Brennan. He was the operations officer at Task Force headquarters. He's a full colonel now, works at the Pentagon. Brennan. Margaret tasted the name like poison. And the after-action investigation. Found no fault. Determined it was a tragic but unavoidable combat loss. Ahmadi got away, by the way. He's probably still out there, still making bombs, still killing people. Callahan's voice turned bitter. But at least we followed the timeline. At least we didn't miss our window. Margaret turned slowly. Why are you telling me this now? Why not at the funeral? Why not in the weeks after? Why wait 13 years? Because I'm a coward. Callahan said it simply factually. Because I convinced myself that telling you would only make it worse, that you'd been through enough, that knowing wouldn't bring James back, and because I was protecting my own career, my own reputation. If it came out that we'd falsified radio logs, that we'd covered up the circumstances, I'd have been court-martialed. You should have been court-martialed. Yes. He didn't argue. I should have been. But I took the coward's way out. I retired quietly. I've been living in Richmond working as a contractor, trying not to think about it. He looked up at her. And then I saw that video. Saw you talking about that day. Saw you describing how you cleared those secondaries while James's body was right there. And I realized that you've been carrying the truth about your courage while I've been hiding the truth about my cowardice. Margaret walked back to the table, sat down. Does anyone else know about this? Anyone still active? A few of the guys who were on that mission. Most of them have gotten out. A couple are still in, and obviously whoever was in the operations center that day. But it's not something people talk about. It's buried in classified after-action reports that no one reads anymore. I want those reports. Master Chief. I want them, all of them. The originals before you deleted the radio logs, the modified versions you submitted, everything. Margaret's voice was steel. You came here to confess. Fine. Now you're going to help me get the truth. Callahan nodded slowly. I still have copies. I kept them. I think part of me always knew this day would come. Bring them to me, tomorrow, all of them. What are you going to do? Margaret looked at him with eyes that had stared down bombs and Taliban fighters and death itself. I'm going to make sure my husband's death meant something, and I'm going to make sure that Colonel Brennan answers for what he did. Callahan left an hour later. Margaret sat alone in her kitchen as dawn broke over Virginia, thinking about James arguing on that radio, thinking about him being ordered into a kill zone he'd identified, and tried to avoid thinking about how he died following orders he knew were wrong. She thought about the tattoo on her wrist, about the promise she'd made to honor his memory. She'd thought that meant living well, serving with integrity, teaching the next generation. Now she understood it meant something more. It meant getting him justice. Her phone buzzed. A text from Commander Vance. Saw you're trending on military Twitter. Your speech hit hard. Well done. Margaret typed back, need to meet, urgent. Not about the speech. The response came immediately. My office. 1,000 hours. I'll clear my schedule. Margaret spent the next few hours reading everything she could find about Lieutenant Colonel, now Colonel Marcus Brennan. He'd had a stellar career. Bronze Star Defense Meritorious Service Medal, all the right assignments. He was currently assigned to the Joint Staff at the Pentagon working on Special Operations Policy. He'd done very well for himself since ordering James Hayes to his death. At Aero 8:30, Callahan returned with a banker's box full of documents. It's all here. Original radio logs, modified logs, email chains, after-action reports. I've been waiting 13 years to hand this over to someone. Margaret took the box. You understand what happens next. If I pursue this, you're going to be implicated. You'll lose your pension. You might face charges. I understand. Callahan met her eyes. I'm ready. I should have been ready 13 years ago. At 09:45, Margaret arrived at Little Creek. The gate guards snapped crisp salutes when they saw her credentials. Word had spread. She was the Master Chief, now the one who'd been disrespected and then vindicated. They weren't going to make that mistake. Vance's office was on the second floor of the headquarters building. Her aide showed Margaret in immediately. Master Chief. Vance stood, shook her hand. What's going on? Margaret set the banker's box on Vance's desk. I need to tell you about the day my husband died, the real story, not the one in the official reports. For the next hour, Margaret laid it out. The mission, the orders, James's objections, the deleted radio logs, the cover-up. Vance listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When Margaret finished, Vance sat back in her chair. This is explosive. If what you're saying is true, it's true. I have the documentation, original radio logs with timestamps, emails from the operations center, after-action reports that don't match the radio traffic. Master Chief, you understand what you're asking for here. A full investigation into a 13-year-old combat death, accusations against a current colonel, questions about operational decision-making and cover-ups. This will detonate like a bomb in the New South Wales community. Good, Margaret said flatly. It should. Because James died following an order he knew was wrong, and then we lied about it to make everyone look better. We told his parents it was a routine patrol. We told the team it was unavoidable. We told everyone that he died doing his job, when the truth is he died because someone valued mission success over operator safety. Vance was quiet for a long moment. I need to brief the Admiral. Admiral Kramer, head of Naval Special Warfare Command. This goes above my level. I understand. And Master Chief, I need to be clear with you. This could get ugly. Brennan has a lot of allies. A lot of people who won't want this story coming out. You're going to face pushback. They're going to question your motives, your evidence, maybe even your mental state. Margaret leaned forward. Commander, I spent 26 years in the Navy. I deployed 8 times. I defused over 300 bombs. I served with distinction, and I earned every medal they ever gave me. I am not some grieving widow who can't handle the truth. I am a Master Chief Petty Officer who was lied to about how her husband died, and I want answers. Vance nodded slowly. Then let's get you those answers. I'll call Admiral Kramer now. The meeting with Admiral Kramer happened that afternoon in a secure conference room at New South Wales headquarters. Kramer was 58, a former SEAL who'd commanded teams in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was known as a straight shooter, someone who didn't tolerate politics or bullshit. Margaret walked him through everything. He listened, asked pointed questions, examined the documents Callahan had provided. "Master Chief," he said finally, "if this is accurate, we have a significant problem. Not just with Colonel Brennan, but with everyone who participated in the cover-up. That includes people still serving in the teams." "I understand, sir. I'm going to order a full investigation. Naval Criminal Investigative Service will handle it. It's going to take months, maybe longer. And I can't promise you the outcome you want. Brennan will argue he made the best decision he could with the information he had. He'll say James was free to refuse the order if he felt it was unlawful. Following a lawful but stupid order isn't refusing to obey," Margaret said. "It's being a good officer. James followed that order because that's what officers do. And he died because of it." Kramer walked to the window overlooking the base. "You know what the hardest part of my job is, Master Chief? It's not the operations, it's not the budgets, it's not the politics. It's living with the decisions that got good people killed. I've made calls that sent men to their deaths, calls I'd make differently if I could do it over. But you don't get do-overs in war, you live with it. Respectfully, sir, this isn't about living with a hard decision. This is about lying about it afterward. If Brennan had owned it, if he'd said, 'I made the call and it went bad,' that would be different. But he covered it up. He deleted evidence. He made James's death look like bad luck instead of bad judgment." Kramer turned back to her. "You're right. And that's why I'm ordering the investigation. You'll be contacted by NCIS within 48 hours. Cooperate fully. Give them everything you have. And, Master Chief," he paused, "prepare yourself. This is going to hurt. You're going to have to relive that day in excruciating detail. You're going to have to face people who were there, who lied, who participated in the cover-up. It's going to tear open wounds you've spent 13 years trying to heal." "I know," Margaret said, "but my husband deserves the truth, even if it hurts." The NCIS investigation began 3 days later. Special Agent Lisa Torres was the lead investigator, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who'd worked military cases for 20 years. She set up in a conference room at Little Creek and began interviewing everyone connected to the mission. Margaret was the first interview. It lasted 6 hours. Torres went through every detail of that day, from the pre-mission brief to the convoy formation to the blast to the aftermath. She asked about James's demeanor, his concerns, his relationship with his command. "Did your husband ever mention feeling pressured to take unnecessary risks?" Torres asked. James was a SEAL. He took risks every day. But he was also careful, methodical. He believed in calculated risk, not reckless endangerment. Margaret paused. "The week before he died, he called me. Satellite phone. He said he was worried about the operations tempo, about command pushing for results without adequate planning. He said it felt like they were more concerned with metrics than with bringing everyone home." Torres wrote that down. "Did he mention anyone specifically?" "He mentioned Brennan. Said Brennan had never been a team guy, had come up through conventional forces, didn't understand how SEALs operated. Said Brennan treated missions like checkboxes instead of living, breathing operations." The interviews continued for weeks. Callahan spent 8 hours with Torres, handing over everything and confessing his role in the cover-up. Other team members from that deployment were tracked down and interviewed. Some confirmed the story. Some claimed not to remember. A few tried to maintain the official narrative until Torres confronted them with the original radio logs. The radio logs were the key. They showed everything: James requesting permission to halt and clear on foot, Brennan denying the request, James arguing, Brennan pulling rank, James's final transmission, Roger, rolling forward, God help us. Those 4 words became the center of the investigation. God help us. Not the words of a confident operator executing a routine patrol. The words of a man who knew he was driving into a trap because someone thousands of miles away was too stubborn to listen. Colonel Brennan was interviewed 6 weeks into the investigation. He arrived at Little Creek with 2 lawyers and a JAG officer. The interview lasted 12 hours over 2 days. Margaret wasn't allowed to be present, but Torres briefed her afterward. He's claiming operational necessity, Torres said. Says the intelligence was solid. Says the window was narrow. Says Lieutenant Commander Hayes was free to refuse if he genuinely believed the order was unlawful. But he admits he gave the order. He admits he gave the order. He also admits that Hayes objected. But he claims Hayes's objections were tactical, not safety-based. Claims Hayes was being overcautious because you were in the convoy, that he wasn't thinking clearly. Margaret felt rage building in her chest. He's blaming James for his own death. In essence, yes. He's saying that an officer who lets personal concerns override mission requirements isn't fit to lead. That if Hayes really thought it was too dangerous, he should have formally refused the order and faced the consequences. James would never refuse an order. I know, that's the problem. Brennan knew it too. He knew exactly what kind of officer Hayes was, knew he'd follow orders, even if he disagreed with them. And he exploited that. Torres closed her file. Master Chief, I've seen a lot of cases in my career. This is one of the clearest examples of command negligence I've ever encountered, but it's also one of the hardest to prosecute, because Brennan's going to argue everything was within his authority as operations officer, and technically he's right. So he gets away with it. I didn't say that. I said it's hard, not impossible. Torres leaned forward. The cover-up is where we have him. Deleting radio logs, falsifying reports, ordering subordinates to lie in official statements, that's not within his authority. That's a crime. The investigation concluded 4 months after it began. The NCIS report was damning. It found that Colonel Brennan had exercised poor judgment in ordering the convoy forward, despite Lieutenant Commander Hayes' objections. It found that Brennan had then directed the falsification of records to conceal his role in the decision. It recommended administrative action against Brennan and recommended criminal charges for the records falsification. The report landed on Admiral Kramer's desk on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, it was leaked to the press. The story exploded across military and mainstream media. SEAL ordered to his death by Pentagon Colonel, read one headline. Cover-up in combat death revealed after 13 years, read another. Margaret's name was everywhere. Her story, her speech at Little Creek, her fight for the truth. The Navy moved quickly to contain the damage. Brennan was relieved of his duties pending further investigation. A press release announced a full review of operational decision-making protocols. Admiral Kramer gave an interview promising accountability and transparency. But behind the scenes, Margaret was told the reality criminal charges against Brennan were unlikely. The records falsification had occurred 13 years ago. Key witnesses had retired or died. Statutes of limitations were in play. The best they could hope for was administrative punishment, loss of rank, forfeiture of some retirement pay, a letter in his permanent record. It's not enough, Margaret told Vance when they met to discuss the outcome. He ordered my husband into a kill zone and then lied about it. And the worst that happens is he loses a star and some money. I know it's not enough, Vance said quietly, but it's what we can prove in a legal proceeding. The system isn't designed for this kind of delayed justice. Then the system is broken. Yes, Vance agreed. It is. But Master Chief, you did get something. You got the truth. You got your husband's name cleared. The record now shows that he died trying to do the right thing, that he objected to an order he knew was wrong and followed it anyway, because that's what good officers do. That matters. Margaret looked at her wrist at the tattoo. Does it matter if the person responsible walks away? Ask me in a year, Vance said. Ask me after Brennan has to live with everyone knowing what he did. After he has to explain to his family, his friends, his colleagues why he ordered a SEAL to his death and then covered it up. After he has to carry that shame for the rest of his life. Prison isn't the only punishment, Master Chief. Sometimes the truth is punishment enough. Margaret wasn't sure she believed that, but she was too exhausted to argue. The Navy's official findings were released 2 weeks later. They included a formal apology to Margaret and James's family for the false information provided after his death. They included a commendation for James's service and leadership. They included a statement that his concerns about the mission had been valid, and that his decision to follow orders despite those concerns demonstrated the highest level of professionalism. They did not include criminal charges against Brennan. He was allowed to retire at his current rank with full benefits. Margaret read the findings alone in her kitchen, the same kitchen where Callahan had confessed the truth months earlier. She'd won technically. She'd gotten the investigation. She'd gotten the official acknowledgement. She'd gotten James's reputation restored. But Brennan was free, and James was still dead. Her phone rang. It was Senior Chief Chen from Little Creek. "Master Chief, I just wanted to call and say we're all behind you. What you did, forcing this investigation, getting the truth out, that took guts. Reaper would be proud." "Would he?" Margaret's voice was hollow. "I'm not sure what I accomplished except proving that the system protects its own." "You accomplished more than you know," Chen said. "Every officer in the teams is talking about this. Every operations center is talking about this. You made it impossible for them to ignore what happens when command gets it wrong. That's going to save lives, Master Chief. Maybe not today, but someday, some lieutenant is going to push back on a bad order, and some colonel is going to remember what happened to Brennan. That's your husband's legacy now. That's what his death means." After they hung up, Margaret sat with those words. That's what his death means. She'd spent 13 years trying to make his death mean something through her own service. Now maybe it meant something bigger. A cautionary tale. A lesson learned in blood. It wasn't the justice she'd wanted, but maybe it was the justice James needed. She walked to the small shrine she kept in her living room. James's photo in his dress uniform, his seal trident, his purple heart. She'd added the official findings to the display, the document that finally told the truth about how he died. "I kept fighting," she told his photo, "just like you would have, and we got them to admit it. That's something." The photo didn't answer. It never did. But standing there in the quiet of her home, Margaret felt something shift. Not peace exactly, but maybe acceptance. She'd done everything she could. She'd fought the good fight. She'd forced the truth into the light. Now she had to figure out how to live with that truth, and with the knowledge that sometimes the truth wasn't enough. Outside, the Virginia afternoon was fading into evening. Tomorrow she had another speaking engagement, this time at the Naval Academy. More young faces looking at her for wisdom, for guidance, for hope. She'd give it to them. She'd tell them about James, about that day, about fighting for the truth, even when the system fought back. She'd tell them that sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel like victory. Sometimes it just feels like surviving. But surviving was what she did. It was what she'd always done. And maybe that would have to be enough. The Naval Academy auditorium was packed when Margaret arrived. Midshipmen filled every seat, their uniforms crisp, their faces young and eager. She stood backstage listening to the introduction being given by the superintendent, feeling the familiar twist of anxiety in her gut. This was different from Little Creek. These weren't experienced sailors who'd seen combat. These were kids barely 20 years old who still believed in heroes and honor and clean victories. She was about to complicate that belief considerably. "Please welcome Master Chief Petty Officer Margaret Hayes, United States Navy, retired." The applause was thunderous. Margaret walked onto the stage, shook the superintendent's hand, and faced the crowd. She'd given this speech a dozen times in the past 2 months since the investigation concluded. Each time it got a little easier and a little harder at the same time. "Good morning," she began. "I'm going to tell you a story about the day I learned that doing the right thing can cost you everything, and that sometimes the system you serve doesn't serve you back." She talked about James, about the mission, about his objections and Brennan's orders, and the explosion that tore her life apart. She talked about clearing those secondaries while kneeling in his blood. And then she talked about the cover-up, about 13 years of lies, about forcing the truth into the light, only to watch it change nothing. The auditorium was silent. These kids had joined the Navy because they believed in something bigger than themselves. Now here was a Master Chief telling them that bigger thing could fail them, could lie to them, could sacrifice them for convenience. When she finished, a midshipman in the front row raised his hand. He was tall, athletic, probably destined for the SEAL teams based on his build. "Master Chief, with respect, are you saying we shouldn't follow orders, that we should question our superiors?" I'm saying you should follow lawful orders. I'm saying when your gut tells you something is wrong, you speak up. And if they order you forward anyway, you follow that order, but you make damn sure someone documents your objections. Because if it goes bad, someone needs to know you tried. But Lieutenant Commander Hayes spoke up, and it didn't save him, another midshipman called out. No, it didn't. But 13 years later, his objections cleared his name. They proved he wasn't reckless, wasn't negligent, wasn't suicidal. They proved he was a good officer following bad orders. That matters to his legacy. It matters to his family. It matters to every SEAL who served with him. A female midshipman in the back stood up. Master Chief, did getting the truth make it better? Did the investigation help you heal? Margaret considered the question carefully. It didn't bring him back. It didn't punish the person responsible. But it gave me something I'd been missing for 13 years. Context. Understanding. The knowledge that his death wasn't meaningless chaos, but the result of specific decisions made by specific people. That makes it different. Not better. Just different. After the speech, Margaret was escorted to a private reception with the Academy's senior leadership. They wanted to thank her, to tell her how inspiring she was, to assure her that the Navy was learning from James's death. She was halfway through a conversation with a 2-star admiral when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Master Chief Hayes, this is Colonel Brennan. We need to talk. Margaret excused herself, stepped into the hallway and stared at the message. After everything, the investigation, the media coverage, the findings, now he wanted to talk. She typed back, I have nothing to say to you. The response came in immediately. I have things to say to you. Things that didn't come out in the investigation. Things you deserve to know. Meet me. 1 hour. Neutral ground. Margaret's hands shook with rage, the audacity of this man. But underneath the rage was something else. Curiosity. What could he possibly have to say that would matter now? She texted back, where? Arlington National Cemetery. Section 60. I'll find you. Section 60. Where the recent war dead were buried. Where James should have been buried if Margaret hadn't insisted on a private ceremony in his hometown instead. She drove to Arlington in a daze, her mind racing. This could be a trap. Brennan could be recording her, looking for something to use against her in his appeals. But something in his message felt genuine, desperate even. She found him standing alone among the white headstones, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders hunched. He looked older than his photos, smaller somehow. When he saw her approaching, he straightened, but didn't salute. Master Chief? Colonel. Margaret kept 10 feet between them. You have 5 minutes. I wanted to apologize, face to face, not through lawyers or statements, to actually say the words to you. Brennan's voice was rough. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I gave that order. I'm sorry your husband died because of my decision, and I'm sorry I covered it up afterward. You think an apology fixes this? No, nothing fixes this, but you deserve to hear it anyway. Brennan looked at the headstones around them. I've been coming here every week since the investigation started, walking through these graves, reading the names, doing the math on how many of them died because of orders I gave, orders other colonels gave. Orders that made sense in an operations center but were death sentences in the field. Spare me the sob story. It's not a sob story, it's a confession. Brennan turned to face her fully. The truth is worse than what came out in the investigation. The truth is, I knew James was right. I knew that convoy should have stopped. I knew the intelligence wasn't solid enough to risk pushing forward. But I was under pressure from my boss, a general who wanted results, who'd been writing me for weeks about our kill capture numbers. And I made a choice. I sacrificed your husband's judgment for my career. Margaret felt her chest tighten. You're telling me you knowingly sent him to his death. I'm telling you I took a calculated risk with his life and I lost. And then I panicked. Because if the truth came out that he'd objected, that I'd overruled him, that I'd been wrong, my career was over. So I deleted the logs. I pressured the team to keep quiet. I turned a command failure into a tragic accident. Brennan's eyes were wet. And for 13 years I've told myself I did the right thing. That protecting the institution mattered more than honoring one man. That the mission justified the lies. And now Now I've watched my own son go through OCS. He's 23, same age James was when he got his trident. And all I can think about is what if some colonel makes the same choice with my son that I made with your husband? What if someone decides my kid's life is worth less than their metrics? Margaret laughed a bitter sound. So you had to have a son to develop a conscience. Maybe. Or maybe I just finally ran out of ways to lie to myself. Brennan pulled an envelope from his pocket. This is my formal resignation from the Navy. I'm not waiting for the administrative board. I'm not fighting the pension reduction. I'm walking away because I don't deserve to wear this uniform anymore. He held out the envelope. Margaret didn't take it. You think resigning makes you noble. You think I care if you keep your pension. I think it's the only thing I can do that matters. I can't bring James back. I can't undo the lies. But I can stop pretending I deserve to be here. Brennan set the envelope on a nearby headstone. There's something else. The general who was pressuring me for results. General Morrison. He's still active duty, still making the same kind of decisions. I've been documenting his pattern for months. Every questionable call, every time he prioritized metrics over safety. It's all in here. He pulled out a thick folder, set it next to the envelope. This is my real apology. Proof that the problem wasn't just me. That the culture that killed your husband is still alive and making the same mistakes. Do with it whatever you want. Give it to NCIS. Give it to the press. Burn it. I don't care. But if you want to actually change something, if you want James's death to mean something bigger than one colonel's career ending, this is how you do it. Margaret stared at the folder. Why should I trust you? Why should I believe any of this isn't just another manipulation? Because I'm done, Master Chief. I'm burned out. I'm done lying, done covering up, done pretending the system works when it clearly doesn't. You broke me. The investigation broke me. Seeing my son in uniform broke me. I've got nothing left to protect except maybe my soul, and that's already pretty goddamn compromised. He started to walk away, then stopped. One more thing. That day after the blast, James's last transmission before he died. It wasn't in the radio logs we submitted, but I heard it. I was listening when he said it. Margaret's heart stopped. What did he say? He said, "Tell Rachel I'm sorry. Tell her I tried." Then nothing. Brennan's voice cracked completely. Those were his last words, and I deleted them because they made it too clear that he knew. That he'd known all along it was a trap. Margaret couldn't breathe. The world tilted. "I'm sorry," Brennan whispered. "I'm sorry I took those words from you. I'm sorry I took everything from you." He walked away through the headstones, leaving Margaret alone with the envelope and the folder and the knowledge of James's final words. "Tell Rachel I'm sorry. Tell her I tried." She collapsed onto the grass, the folder pressed against her chest, and wept. Not the quiet, controlled crying she'd done at funerals and memorials. Raw, gasping sobs that tore through her chest. James had been thinking of her. In his last moment, knowing he was about to die, he'd tried to send her a message. And Brennan had stolen it. She didn't know how long she sat there. Long enough that the sun moved, long enough that a groundskeeper approached and asked if she was okay. She waved him away, pulled herself together, picked up the folder and the envelope. She drove straight to NCIS headquarters. Special Agent Torres was still in her office despite it being past 7 in the evening. "Master Chief, what's wrong?" Margaret dumped the folder on Torres's desk. "Brennan just gave me this. Says it's documentation of a pattern of negligence going up the chain. Says General Morrison is still making the same calls that got James killed." Torres opened the folder, started reading. Her eyes widened. "Holy shit, this is damning. Dates, missions, decisions, outcomes. He's been keeping receipts. He also told me something else." Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "James's last transmission, the one that didn't make it into the official logs. He said, 'Tell Rachel I'm sorry, tell her I tried.'" Torres set down the papers, her expression stricken. "Master Chief, I need you to verify it. I need to know if Brennan is telling the truth or if this is just another manipulation. I'll check every archive, every backup, every system we have access to. If that transmission exists anywhere, I'll find it." Torres paused. "But Master Chief, even if it's true, even if we find it, that doesn't change the outcome. Brennan is already done. The investigation is closed. This isn't about Brennan anymore. This is about Morrison. This is about making sure it doesn't happen again. Margaret stood. Can you open a new investigation based on this? That's above my pay grade, but I can brief my supervisors. I can make sure the right people see this. Torres looked at the folder again. This could go all the way to Congress, you know. Once this is out there, it's going to explode. General Morrison has friends, powerful friends. They're going to come after you hard. Let them come. I've survived worse. The investigation into General Morrison began quietly. NCIS brought in more agents, started pulling records, interviewing officers who'd served under him. Margaret was interviewed again, this time as a witness rather than a victim. But word leaked. It always did. Within a week, military blogs were reporting that a new investigation had been opened into operational decision-making in Afghanistan. Within 2 weeks, Morrison's name was attached to the stories. Within 3 weeks, Margaret's name was everywhere again. This time, the backlash was immediate and vicious. Op-eds appeared defending Morrison, calling Margaret a bitter widow on a vendetta. Anonymous sources claimed she was mentally unstable, that she was exploiting her husband's death for attention. Social media filled with veterans attacking her, defending the chain of command, insisting she was destroying morale and undermining good order. Commander Vance called her one evening. Master Chief, I need to warn you. There's a coordinated campaign being organized against you. Former officers loyal to Morrison. They're planning to discredit you publicly. Let them try. They're digging into your medical records, your PTSD diagnosis, your therapy sessions. They're going to claim you're unreliable, that your mental health issues make you an unreliable witness. Margaret felt ice in her veins. Her medical records were supposed to be private. How are they accessing sealed records? I don't know, but they have them. I've seen excerpts circulating on back channels. Vance's voice was tight with anger. This is scorched earth, Master Chief. They're going to destroy you if they can. Then I'll fight back. With what, you're a retired Master Chief going up against a 3-star general and his entire network of cronies. They have resources you can't imagine. Margaret looked at her wrist, at the faded trident. I have the truth, and I have James's memory. That's enough. But it wasn't enough. The attacks intensified. A retired colonel published a book defending Morrison and painting Margaret as an unstable widow who'd latched onto conspiracy theories. A news network ran a segment questioning her credibility. Veterans groups that had once honored her now distanced themselves. Brooks called her one night, his voice shaking. Master Chief, I just saw what they're doing to you. It's wrong. It's completely wrong. What can I do? How can I help? You can keep your head down and focus on being a good sailor, Margaret said tiredly. This isn't your fight. You fought for me when you didn't have to. Let me fight for you. Brooks, these people will destroy your career if you get involved. They'll paint you as another malcontent, another troublemaker. Stay out of it. No. His voice was firm now. With respect, Master Chief, no. You taught me that doing the right thing means standing up even when it costs you something. Well, this is my chance to prove I learned that lesson. 2 days later, Brooks published an open letter on social media. He described the incident at the gate, his shame Margaret's grace. He talked about her speech at Little Creek, about watching her refuse to back down from powerful people who wanted her silent. He ended with a simple declaration. Master Chief Hayes is the most honorable person I've ever met. If you're attacking her, you're attacking everything this Navy is supposed to stand for. The letter went viral. Other young sailors started sharing their own stories of meeting Margaret, of being inspired by her. Female service members flooded social media with support. Veterans organizations that had gone silent suddenly found their voices again. And then Senior Chief Chen published his own statement. He described serving with James, described Margaret's actions that day in Afghanistan, described watching her fight for 13 years to honor her husband's memory. He named names, called out the officers who were trying to destroy her, challenged them to meet her face to face if they had the courage. The tide began to turn, but the damage was done. Margaret's home address was leaked online. She started getting death threats. Someone spray-painted "traitor" on her garage door. Her windows were egged. The local police increased patrols around her house but told her they couldn't arrest anyone without catching them in the act. She was loading groceries into her truck one afternoon when a man approached her in the parking lot. He was older, wearing a Vietnam veteran's cap. "You're that woman," he said. "The one trying to take down General Morrison." Margaret tensed, ready for confrontation. "I'm Margaret Hayes. My son served under Morrison. Afghanistan 2012. He died in an ambush that should never have happened. Morrison pushed them into a valley that every ground commander said was too dangerous. My son was 24. The man's eyes were wet. "I've been waiting 15 years for someone to hold Morrison accountable. Thank you. Thank you for having the guts to do what no one else would." He shook her hand and walked away before Margaret could respond. She stood in the parking lot, groceries forgotten, and cried. Not from sadness this time, but from the weight of understanding that James wasn't Morrison's only victim. That there were other families, other sons and daughters and husbands and wives who died because someone in an operations center had made a bad call. This was bigger than her grief, bigger than her need for justice. This was about changing a system that ate its children and then lied about it. The NCIS investigation into Morrison took 8 months. When it concluded, the findings were sealed, but the outcome was public. Morrison was relieved of his command and retired pending further review. The report recommended systemic changes to operational oversight, mandatory documentation of commander objections, and regular audits of decision-making patterns. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. Margaret stood in her kitchen the day the news broke, reading the official statement from the Navy. Morrison was gone. Brennan was gone. The policies that had enabled them were being reformed. And James's name was now permanently associated with the push for accountability in military operations. Her phone rang. It was Admiral Kramer. "Master Chief, I wanted you to hear this from me first. Congress is holding hearings on military operational decision-making. They've requested you as a witness. It's voluntary, but they'd like you to testify about your experience." Margaret closed her eyes. More testimony. More reliving. More attacks from Morrison's allies. "When?" she asked. 3 weeks. Capitol Hill. Full Armed Services Committee. Kramer paused. "Master Chief, you've done enough. No one would blame you if you said no. You've fought harder and longer than anyone should have to." "What happens if I don't testify?" "They'll hold the hearings without you. They'll use your written statements. It'll still be effective. But your presence would be powerful. Your voice matters." Margaret looked at the photo of James on her wall. Looked at his smile, his confidence, his certainty that he was serving something greater than himself. "Tell them yes," she said. "I'll testify." "Are you sure?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." 3 weeks later, Margaret sat at a table facing the House Armed Services Committee. Cameras surrounded her. Behind her sat Brooks and Chen and Commander Vance and dozens of other service members who'd come to support her. Across the aisle sat Morrison's lawyers and supporters, their faces hard and hostile. The chairman gavelled the hearing to order. "Master Chief Hayes, thank you for being here today. We know this hasn't been easy." "Nothing about the last 14 years has been easy, Congressman. Can you tell us in your own words what happened the day your husband died?" And Margaret did. She told them everything. The mission, the orders, the objections, the explosion, the cover-up, the investigation, the cost of forcing the truth into the light. She spoke for 2 hours. When she finished, the room was silent. Then a congressman from Virginia spoke up. "Master Chief, what do you want to come from these hearings? What's the end goal?" Margaret didn't hesitate. "I want to promise that no other widow has to fight for 13 years to learn the truth about how her husband died. I want commanders held accountable for bad decisions. I want the lives of our service members valued more than mission metrics. And I want my husband's death to mean something, to save someone, to change something, to matter." "It matters, Master Chief," the chairman said quietly. "I promise you it matters." The hearings lasted 3 days. When they concluded, Congress announced new legislation requiring independent review of combat deaths where commander objections had been documented. They announced increased protections for whistleblowers. They announced mandatory training for senior officers on operational ethics. James Hayes' name was attached to all of it. Margaret drove home from Washington, exhausted, but feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Not peace exactly, but purpose. She'd turned her pain into policy. She'd forced the system to evolve. She'd made sure James's death counted for something beyond grief and loss. When she got home, there was a package on her doorstep. No return address. Inside was a folded American flag and a note in handwriting she didn't recognize. My husband served under LTC Hayes. He's alive today because your fight changed how commanders think about risk. Thank you for saving my family. Margaret carried the flag inside, added it to the shrine beside James's photo. The collection was growing. Medals, citations, letters, flags. Each one a testament to lives, touched lives, saved lives, changed by what she and James had done together. She touched the trident on her wrist. "We did it," she whispered to his photo. "It took 14 years, but we did it. You can rest now." But she knew James wouldn't rest, and neither would she, because there was still work to do, still stories to tell, still changes to fight for. The battle was over. The war continued. And Margaret Hayes, Master Chief Petty Officer retired, was just getting started. 6 months after the congressional hearings, Margaret received a call from the Navy's Bureau of Personnel. The voice on the other end was formal, professional, careful. "Master Chief Hayes, this is Captain Rodriguez from Boopers. We have a somewhat unusual request. The Secretary of the Navy would like to meet with you, in person, at the Pentagon." Margaret set down her coffee cup. "Why?" "He didn't share specifics with me, Master Chief. Only that it concerns the Hayes Memorial Act that Congress just passed. He wants to discuss implementation. The Hayes Memorial Act, named after James, requiring independent review of combat deaths, protecting whistleblowers, mandating commander objection documentation. It had passed with overwhelming bipartisan support 3 weeks ago. Margaret had watched the vote from her living room alone, crying into a glass of wine. "When does he want to meet?" "Next Tuesday, 1400 hours. I can arrange transportation if needed. I'll drive myself. Send me the details." After she hung up, Margaret sat at her kitchen table for a long time. The Secretary of the Navy didn't meet with retired Master Chiefs unless something significant was happening. She ran through possibilities in her mind, trying to anticipate what this could be about. An award. Recognition, or something else entirely. Her phone buzzed, a text from Commander Vance. "Heard about the SecNav meeting, call me," Margaret dialed. "Margaret." Vance picked up on the first ring. "Master Chief, I have intel, unofficial but solid. The Secretary wants to offer you something. A position. Civilian advisor to Naval Special Warfare on operational ethics and accountability." Margaret felt her stomach drop. "I'm retired. I'm done with all of this." "Are you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, you've spent the last year fighting harder than most people on active duty. You forced 2 investigations testified before Congress and got legislation passed that's going to change how we operate. That doesn't sound like someone who's done." "Vance, I'm 56 years old. I'm tired. I've buried my husband, fought the Navy, and been dragged through the mud by people who should have known better. I just want to be left alone." "I understand. But Master Chief, think about what you could do from inside the system. You'd have direct access to Nisafdal's leadership. You'd be in the room when operational decisions are being made. You could be the voice that stops the next Brennan, the next Morrison." Margaret closed her eyes. "That's not fair. You're asking me to give up the one thing I've earned. Peace, distance, a life that's my own. I'm asking you to finish what you started. James's death meant something because you made it mean something. But legislation is just words on paper. Implementation is where it either lives or dies. You know that. I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking." Tuesday arrived too quickly. Margaret drove to the Pentagon in her truck wearing dress slacks and a blazer, the most formal civilian clothes she owned. She'd debated wearing her old service uniform but decided against it. She wasn't active duty anymore. She needed to remember that. Security processed her through multiple checkpoints. Each time she showed her retiree ID, the guards snapped to attention after reading it. Word had spread even here. Master Chief Hayes, the woman who'd taken on generals and won. Secretary Mitchell's office was on the E-ring, the outer corridor with windows overlooking the Potomac. His aide, a sharp-eyed Navy lieutenant, escorted her in. Secretary Mitchell stood when she entered. He was 52, a former submarine officer known for being direct and impatient with bureaucracy. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Master Chief Hayes, thank you for coming. Mr. Secretary. Margaret sat, keeping her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. Mitchell didn't waste time. I'm going to be direct with you because I think you appreciate directness. The Hayes Memorial Act is the most significant reform to operational decision-making in 30 years, but it's also toothless without proper implementation and oversight. I need someone to lead that implementation, someone the community respects, someone who understands both the operational side and the human cost. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a mission. Civilian GS-15 position, equivalent to a one-star admiral in terms of access and authority. You'd report directly to me and the Chief of Naval Operations. Your mandate would be to ensure that every provision of the Hayes Act is implemented across all NISALVAL commands, and eventually throughout the entire Navy. Margaret shook her head. Mr. Secretary, with respect, I'm not qualified for this. I was an EOD tech, not a policy expert. You're exactly qualified for this. You lived the failure of the old system. You fought to change it. You understand what's at stake in ways that no policy expert ever could. Mitchell leaned forward. Master Chief, I need someone who will walk into an operations center and ask the hard questions. Someone who will push back when commanders prioritize metrics over lives. Someone who has the moral authority to tell a captain or an admiral that they're wrong. That's you. And if I say no, then I'll find someone else. But they won't have your story. They won't have your credibility. And the implementation will be weaker because of it. Mitchell pulled out a folder, slid it across the desk. This is what we're up against. Resistance from officers who think the act is political correctness run amok. Pushback from commands that don't want civilian oversight. Bureaucratic foot-dragging designed to delay implementation until everyone forgets why we passed this law in the first place. Margaret opened the folder. Internal memos, emails, meeting notes. All documenting the subtle ways commands were already trying to undermine the Act's provisions. Her anger flared. They're sabotaging it. Not openly, but yes, essentially. Which is why I need you. You're not some Pentagon staffer they can ignore. You're Master Chief Margaret Hayes. You're the reason this law exists. When you walk into a room, they can't pretend not to understand what's at stake. Margaret closed the folder, looked Mitchell in the eye. If I do this, I do it my way. I do. No handlers, no scripts, no political considerations. I go where the problems are and I fix them regardless of whose feelings get hurt. Mitchell smiled. Master Chief, if I wanted someone diplomatic, I'd have hired a diplomat. I want someone who scares commanders into doing the right thing. You're perfect. I need to think about it. You have 48 hours. After that, I need to move forward with someone. Mitchell stood, extended his hand. Master Chief, your husband died serving his country. You've spent 14 years making sure that death meant something. This is your chance to finish that mission. Don't walk away now. Margaret shook his hand and left. She sat in her truck in the Pentagon parking lot for 20 minutes staring at the steering wheel before she called Vance. He offered me the job. And I'm terrified. What if I fail? What if I take this position and I can't actually change anything? What if James's legacy becomes a failed experiment in reform? Master Chief, you've already changed everything. The question is whether you want to keep changing it or let someone else take over. Someone else would probably be better at this. Bullshit. Vance's voice was sharp. Stop hiding behind false modesty. You know you're the right person for this. You're just scared. Of course I'm scared. This is huge. This is permanent. If I do this, I can't go back to my quiet life. I can't pretend to be retired anymore. Then don't pretend. Be what you actually are, a warrior who's still fighting just in a different battlefield. Margaret drove home in silence, her mind churning. That night, she did something she hadn't done in months. She pulled out the box from her closet, the one containing James's personal effects from Afghanistan. His watch, his wedding ring, his notebook where he'd kept tactical observations and personal thoughts. She opened the notebook, flipped through pages of mission notes and sketches, until she found what she was looking for. A letter written in James's handwriting dated a week before he died. Rachel, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm writing this because something feels off about the next few missions. Command is pushing too hard too fast. I've raised concerns, but I'm getting overruled. If something happens, I need you to know I tried. I tried to keep everyone safe. I tried to do the right thing. But sometimes the right thing isn't enough against bad leadership. Promise me something. If I don't make it home, don't let my death be meaningless. Fight for the truth. Make them accountable. Be the person I know you are, stronger than all of them, braver than all of them, unwilling to accept lies for the sake of convenience. You're going to want to curl up and disappear. Don't. Fight. For me, for the guys, for everyone who comes after us. Fight until they have no choice but to change. I love you. Always. James. Margaret read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. He'd known. He'd known what was coming, and he'd written her a mission order. Fight. Make them accountable. Don't let it be meaningless. She'd been following that order for 14 years without even realizing it. She picked up her phone and texted Secretary Mitchell, I accept the position. When do I start? The response came within minutes. Monday, 0800. Welcome aboard, Master Chief. Margaret's first day at the Pentagon was chaos. She was given an office, a staff of 3 civilian analysts, and a mandate so broad it was almost paralyzing. Implement the Hayes Act across all Naval Special Warfare commands. Develop training curricula. Create oversight mechanisms. Establish reporting procedures. Build a culture of accountability. Her first meeting was with Admiral Kramer, who greeted her with a handshake and a wry smile. Master Chief, congratulations. You've just taken on the most difficult job in the Navy. I've defused bombs for a living admiral. How hard can this be? Bombs don't have egos and political connections. Admirals do. He wasn't wrong. Within her first week, Margaret encountered resistance at every level. Commanders who claimed the act was unworkable. Staff officers who slow-rolled her requests for information. Legal teams who found technicalities in every proposed policy. She responded by going directly to the commands. She showed up unannounced at Little Creek at Coronado at Pearl Harbor. She sat in operations centers and asked questions that made senior officers uncomfortable. She interviewed junior personnel who told her about missions that felt wrong, objections that were ignored, concerns that were dismissed. And she documented everything. 3 months into the job, she presented her first report to Secretary Mitchell. It was brutal. She'd identified 17 recent operations where commander objections had been overruled without proper documentation. She'd found 11 cases where operational decisions had prioritized mission success over operator safety. She'd uncovered 4 instances where adverse outcomes had been deliberately underreported to avoid scrutiny. Mitchell read the report in silence. When he finished, he looked up at her. This is going to detonate like a grenade. Good. That's what grenades do. Master Chief, you're talking about relieving multiple commanders, potentially ending careers, opening investigations that will dominate headlines for months. I'm talking about implementing the law that Congress passed, and you asked me to enforce. If that ends careers, those careers deserve to end. Mitchell leaned back in his chair. You don't do halfway, do you? I buried my husband because someone did halfway. I'm not interested in half measures anymore. The report triggered exactly the explosion Mitchell had predicted. 3 captains were relieved of command. 2 admirals received letters of reprimand. NCIS opened new investigations. The Navy Times ran front-page stories. And Margaret received death threats that were serious enough that the Pentagon assigned her security protection. But the resistance also galvanized support. Junior officers started reaching out to her office directly, reporting concerns about operations. Enlisted personnel began using the new reporting mechanisms she'd established. The culture was shifting slowly, painfully, but shifting. Brooks called her one evening. He'd been promoted to second-class petty officer assigned to a new command doing well. "Master Chief, I saw what you're doing at the Pentagon. The guys are talking about it. Some of them are scared you're going to come for them next. But most of them are relieved. They're relieved someone finally cares about keeping them alive more than making quotas. That's all I'm trying to do, Brooks. Keep people alive. You're doing more than that. You're giving people permission to speak up, to say when something feels wrong. That's huge." 2 days later, Margaret received a call from an unknown number. When she answered, the voice was young female, shaking with emotion. "Master Chief Hayes, my name is Lieutenant Jennifer Morrison. I'm stationed at Little Creek. I'm calling because I need help and I don't know where else to turn." Margaret sat up straight. "What's wrong, Lieutenant?" "My platoon commander is planning an operation that feels wrong, like really wrong. The intelligence is questionable, the timeline is compressed, and we're being pushed to execute without adequate prep. I've raised concerns and been told to shut up and follow orders. I'm terrified we're going to lose people, but I'm also terrified that if I push harder, my career is over." Margaret felt ice in her veins. This was it. The exact scenario the Hayes Act was designed to address. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." Lieutenant Morrison talked for 40 minutes. A planned raid on a compound in an unspecified location. She couldn't give details over an unsecured line based on intelligence that was weeks old. A compressed timeline driven by pressure from higher headquarters. A platoon commander who was dismissive of her tactical concerns. A command culture that prioritized mission execution over operational safety. It was James's mission all over again. "Lieutenant, I need you to formally document your objections. Use the reporting mechanism established under the Hayes Act. Submit it through your chain of command. Copy me on everything. They'll retaliate. You know they will. The act includes whistleblower protections. If they retaliate, we'll bury them. But you need to go on record. Right now your concerns are just a phone call. I need documentation. I'm scared. I know. So was my husband. He documented his concerns anyway. It didn't save him, but it ultimately saved others. That's what this is about. Be brave now so someone else doesn't have to be a widow later." Morrison submitted her report the next morning. By that afternoon, her platoon commander had called her into his office and told her she was being removed from the mission roster for performance concerns. By that evening, Margaret had initiated a formal investigation and the mission had been suspended pending review. The blowback was immediate and intense. The platoon commander claimed Morrison was a malcontent. His superiors claimed Margaret was overreaching. Officers throughout the Nisavdollar community complained that she was destroying operational effectiveness with excessive oversight. Margaret responded by presenting the intelligence analysis. It was indeed outdated. The compound was no longer occupied by the target. The mission would have been a dry hole at best and ambush at worst. Morrison had been right. The platoon commander was relieved. His superiors received formal counseling, and Morrison was personally commended by Secretary Mitchell for her courage. The message rippled through the community the Hayes Act had teeth, and Master Chief Margaret Hayes was not afraid to use them. Over the next year, Margaret became a fixture in Nisavdollar commands. She was demanding, uncompromising, and utterly fearless. She called out admirals in meetings. She challenged operational plans. She protected junior officers who spoke up. And slowly, incrementally, the culture began to change. Commanders started documenting objections as a matter of course. Operations centers began involving more voices in decision-making. Risk assessments became more thorough. The number of preventable deaths dropped. It wasn't perfect. Margaret knew it would never be perfect, but it was better. And better was worth fighting for. On the 14th anniversary of James's death, Margaret made her annual pilgrimage to the memorial wall at Little Creek. She stood before his name, her fingers tracing the letters the way she did every year. But this time she wasn't alone. Commander Vance stood beside her. Brooks was there now, a first-class petty officer. Senior Chief Chen, retired now but still connected to the community. And Lieutenant Morrison, who'd flown in from her new assignment specifically to be there. "I brought them," Vance said quietly. "I hope that's okay. They wanted to pay their respects." Margaret nodded, unable to speak. Morrison stepped forward. "Master Chief, I never knew Lieutenant Commander Hayes. but I'm alive right now because of what you did in his memory. My whole platoon is alive because you gave me the courage to speak up. I wanted you to know that." Brooks cleared his throat. "Master Chief, I was the idiot at the gate who started all of this, who looked at you and saw nothing but my own ignorance. You could have destroyed me. Instead, you taught me. Everything I am as a sailor I owe to that lesson. So I wanted to say thank you. To you and to Lieutenant Commander Hayes. Because whatever he was in life, his death became something that made me better." Chen placed a hand on Margaret's shoulder. "Reaper was my brother, my friend. He deserved better than the death he got. But you gave him something better than survival. You gave him a legacy. You made his death mean something so profound that it changed an entire institution. That's the greatest honor any warrior could ask for." Margaret looked at them through tears. "I didn't do this alone. I couldn't have. You all fought too. You all took risks to make this happen." "You started it," Vance said firmly. "You stood at that gate and refused to back down. You fought through the investigation, through the congressional hearings, through all the people who tried to destroy you. You took a personal tragedy and turned it into institutional change. That's heroism, Master Chief. That's what warriors do." They stood together in silence, 5 people bound by loss and purpose and the stubborn determination to make the world better than they found it. As the sun set over Little Creek, Margaret touched the wall one last time. "We did it, James," she whispered. "We really did it. You can rest now. We all can." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. There would always be another fight, another injustice, another opportunity to choose courage over comfort. That was the burden and the privilege of surviving. You kept fighting. You kept pushing. You kept demanding better. Margaret Hayes, Master Chief, Petty Officer retired, turned civilian advisor, turned institutional conscience of the United States Navy, wasn't done yet. She would never be done. Because that was what love demanded. Not rest, but action. Not peace, but purpose. Not forgetting, but honoring through continuous, exhausting, necessary work. She looked at the trident tattooed on her wrist, faded now, but eternal. She looked at the names on the wall, each one a story, each one a loss, each one a person who deserved to be remembered not just with tears, but with change. And she made the same promise she'd made 14 years ago, standing in the Afghan desert, with blood on her hands and rage in her heart. "I will make this matter. I will make you matter. I will fight until the system that killed you becomes the system that protects those who come after. I will not stop. I will not compromise. I will not accept that any death is meaningless. This is my mission. This is my promise. This is my love, and I will carry it until my own name joins yours on whatever wall they carve for warriors who gave everything and got nothing but a chance to be remembered." The 5 of them walked away from the memorial together as darkness fell over the base. Behind them, the names remained etched in granite, permanent and unchanging. But the living carried those names forward, transforming memory into mission loss, into purpose, grief, into the stubborn determination to make sure that no more names were added unnecessarily. Margaret Hayes had been mocked at a gate for wearing a tattoo that didn't match someone's narrow idea of what a warrior looked like. She had responded by becoming exactly the kind of warrior James always believed she was: uncompromising, relentless, willing to stand alone against impossible odds, because the alternative was accepting that might makes right, and power protects itself. She had lost her husband to bad leadership and institutional cowardice. She had responded by becoming the leader and the conscience that the institution needed even when it didn't want her. She had been told that the system couldn't change, that she was fighting a losing battle, that she should accept defeat gracefully. She had responded by winning anyway. That was Margaret Hayes' story. That was her legacy. Not the medals or the recognition or the laws that bore her husband's name, but the simple, stubborn refusal to let injustice stand unchallenged. The courage to look at power and say not good enough. The love that transforms grief into action and pain into purpose. She wore her husband's trident on her wrist not as decoration, but as a promise kept daily, hourly, with every breath. A promise that his death would mean something, that the system would be better, that the next generation would inherit not just the glory of service, but the protection of institutions that actually valued the lives they commanded. 14 years from that explosion in Afghanistan to this moment at the memorial wall. 14 years of fighting, of learning, of refusing to accept easy answers or comfortable lies. 14 years of becoming the warrior her husband always knew she was. And she would keep fighting for 14 more years if that's what it took. Because that's what warriors do. They stand their ground. They protect the vulnerable. They demand accountability from the powerful. They transform loss into lessons and tragedy into change. Margaret Hayes had stood at a gate and been mocked for a tattoo. She had responded by changing the United States Navy from the inside out. She had taken her personal pain and turned it into institutional policy. She had made her husband's death mean something so profound that it would echo through generations of service members who would never know his name, but would benefit from his sacrifice. That was enough. That had to be enough. Because nothing would ever bring James back, but everything could honor what he stood for. And so she would keep standing, keep fighting, keep demanding better. Not for recognition or gratitude or even justice, but because some battles are worth fighting even when you know they'll never truly end. That was the warrior's way. That was the price of love. That was the promise etched on her wrist in fading ink and kept alive in every breath, every decision, every moment she chose courage over comfort. Master Chief Margaret Hayes had been tested at a gate by ignorance and prejudice. She had responded by becoming exactly what the Navy needed most, a voice that wouldn't be silenced, a conscience that wouldn't be compromised, a warrior who understood that the greatest battles aren't fought with weapons, but with truth, persistence, and the stubborn refusal to accept that this is just how things are. She had turned her husband's death into a movement. She had transformed a personal tragedy into institutional reform. She had proved that one person armed with nothing but the truth and the courage to speak it could change an entire system. And in doing so, she had honored not just James's memory, but every warrior who ever served, ever sacrificed, ever believed that their service meant something more than following orders blindly. That was her legacy. That was their legacy together. A love story told not in romance, but in reform, not in poetry, but in policy, not in sentiment, but in the stubborn, exhausting, necessary work of making the world better than they found it. The trident on her wrist had been earned 100 times over, not in one moment of crisis, but in 14 years of refusing to let that moment define her as a victim instead of a warrior. And she would wear it for the rest of her life. A reminder that the greatest courage isn't facing death once, but choosing life every single day afterward and demanding that life means something worth the cost of all who paid for it.